Hello, and thank you for joining us with I Will Be Your Voice, a McKinney-Vento moment. Today with us, we have Nikki Johnson-Alfano, Esquire, formerly known as Nikki Johnson-Huston. She is a tax attorney in Philadelphia with her own firm, the law office of Nikki Johnson-Huston, LLC, and spent over 6 years as an Assistant City Solicitor in the major tax unit for the City of Philadelphia Law Department. Nikki started a mentoring program for our high school students interested in legal careers and has led numerous panels to increase educational opportunities. A determined advocate for the homeless, Nikki is also an in-demand inspirational speaker who shares her story with organizations nationwide. So let's please welcome Nikki. Hi, Nikki. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, thank you, ladies. I'm so excited to be here and to have the opportunity to share my journey.
Absolutely. Well, Nikki, go ahead and take it away. We would love to just hear more about you, your experience, and how you came who you are today.
Thank you. I always feel I'm always excited when I hear somebody read my bio. I'm always still a little bit surprised because given, how I started out in life, I always had these dreams, but, I like to say to people that I was probably really an unlikely success story. To kind of go back in time, I was born in Detroit to a single mom of two kids, and my grandmother really played such a central role in my life. She worked as a domestic until she was injured. So she cleaned and cooked for wealthy white families in the suburbs outside of Detroit. And that kept our family kind of working class. And then she was injured in a bus accident when I was about 4 years old. And it took my family kind of from being the working class to being lower income. And, my mom had a lot of personal trauma, I would say, and had an addiction to drugs and alcohol. I faced a lot of generational poverty. And I think that that's something that people don't necessarily think about when we have the conversation about how do you help somebody come out of poverty? How do you help somebody achieve their dreams like I've been able to? Before I was even born, two of my uncles were murdered on the streets of Detroit. One was stabbed to death and the other was shot and wounded at 14 years old when he went to a local corner store. And that ended up leaving him partially paralyzed. And then he died at about 20 years old with complications from pneumonia. So my family knew a lot of strife and a lot of tragedy. And, they always wanted a better life for themselves. But I think that generationally, that can be hard to see your way past it. I always say to people that the reason I have the life that I have is because of my grandmother and her hopes and dreams for me. And one of the things that she did after she was injured, she got a small settlement and she used that money to move our family from Detroit to California so that we could have a better start in life. And I was about 7 years old when we moved to California. And things were okay for the first couple of years, but unfortunately, my mom's personal demons followed us. And within a couple of years of us moving to California, we were near the Santa Barbara area, which is a very expensive place to live, much more so now, but back then, very expensive. And my mom decided that she was going to move away from my grandmother and take us and move to San Diego. So she took myself and my younger brother, who was 2 years younger than me. And that's the first time that my family experienced homelessness. We were staying in a hotel. My mom met a guy and he took all of our money. And we ended up going from a hotel to a motel to people being kind enough to let us, sleep on couches, on floors, and guest rooms and cars. And then, basically we ran out of places to stay. And it was so scary for me as a young child because I didn't really know what was going on. There certainly wasn't a lot of conversations about homelessness, especially in terms of women and children in the way that there is now. There weren't a lot of resources that we were aware of. And I know one of the things that my mom was very concerned about was losing custody of us and people finding out that we were homeless. And, I know that there's a mixed audience. So there may be people listening to this who may be experiencing homelessness themselves or may have in the past, and some people who may not be familiar with homelessness. So the situation that we fell into is once we kind of couldn't stay in motels and just didn't have any other money, is we would kind of have to stand in line to find a place in a shelter that would house women and children. And there just wasn't that many. And there were nights that we were able to get a place and, we would be in a room with lots of people. And the other nights when we couldn't find a place to stay, my mom would be on a park bench with us. She would be at a bus stop, anywhere that she could be where she could be around people and try to keep us as safe as she could. And, I look at it now and I think, gosh, not only was I scared, but I can't imagine being, a young mother in my 20s and having two children that I'm dependent upon and not having the resources that you needed. And during that time, even if you got shelter, it really was for the night. And you would get a meal in the morning and then you would have to, leave for the day. And I think part of that was, this was not to date myself, but, this was in the 80s where, people had this idea of welfare queens, and there was a lot of shaming around poverty. And people just were not as aware or savvy about what some of the causes were, the root causes, the trauma, the generational poverty that was going on. And so you wouldn't have a place to go during the day. You didn't have a phone. You didn't have an address to be able to apply for jobs. Things would get stolen. So you didn't always have all of your paperwork to even be able to prove who you were. And not having a phone or a phone number made it very hard for my mom to be able to apply for jobs. It made it very hard for her to be able to go and try to get assistance, because if she went into an office, she didn't know where she was going. Like if she went into a welfare office, she didn't know where we were going to be able to stay for the night. She wasn't sure if she was going to be able to meet someone or be able to kind of make those connections. We would get meals at a mission where we would have to hear a sermon, and we would get meals for lunch and for dinner. It was a really challenging time of life. And, one of the things though, is we would go to the library during the day because it was a safe place. We didn't necessarily stand out as much. You could be in from the elements. And I would say we were really lucky that we were homeless in a place like California and in San Diego, where there's over 300 days of sunshine. I live in Philadelphia now, and the challenges and struggles with the weather that people have to go through here, you can freeze to death here. And that just wasn't something that we had to deal with in California, luckily. The other aspect for us is that we weren't in school. So, part of the time that we were suffering from homelessness, it was during the summer. But then school started, and we weren't in school. And someone became aware and started asking questions because we were of school age and we were out and about. And my mom's worst fear came into play, which was we ended up being taken into foster care. And the first place in foster care that I was put, the gentleman I woke up and the father was in my room in the middle of the night. And I just remember being so scared. And he didn't do anything to me, but that is part of the fear of being in foster care. And, I was in a few different foster homes, and, some people were really nice and kind, but you weren't their child. There were other people who were less kind and less interested in caring for me. And, I think that foster parents do play an important role, but not everybody's meant to do that. There were foster homes where, I was with other kids that were traumatized and kind of dealing with that. And then I got separated from my little brother. So I'm in this system that I don't really understand. I'm very scared. I don't have kind of that anchor of my family or a school. And it was just really tough. But one of the benefits of going to the library was I started reading. And to anybody who's listening to this that's going through these challenges, it's hard to really think about what your future is going to look like, what the dreams you have for yourself are, because you don't necessarily know where your next meal is going to come, and you don't know where your roof's going to be over your head. But I really want to say, hold on to those dreams, because that's the one thing that people can't take away from you. And for me, my dreams, my goals were my ladder out of poverty. And also now there are programs and people are so much more educated, and you guys work in this space and are doing such great work where schools are aware that there's homeless children, that there is a commitment to, even if you have insecurity, even if you're not homeless, but you're housing insecure or you're couch surfing, that you have the ability to go back to the same school and be housed and have some continuity with people who know you, who maybe understand your situation. And I know it's hard to trust people because a lot of adults had to let me down for me to get in that situation. But there are people who care. And when you come across them, I would really encourage you to reach out and to trust and to let them help you, because that is the thing that is going to give you an opportunity at a better life. And, I'm not judging my mom. I think she was young and she did the best that she could. It just wasn't everything that I needed. And she needed the additional support. She couldn't provide for me the things that she didn't necessarily have. And, I'm such a proponent of the importance of government programming in terms of proper funding for schools, for social services. I always say it takes a lot of money to create a fantastic, accomplished, healed person. But if you don't spend that money while people are young, you're going to spend it later in life, and you're not going to necessarily be spending it on things like books and college and good health care. You may be spending it for mental health services. You may be spending it because they're more likely to be incarcerated. You may end up having to spend it because they're not able to be self-sufficient and to be able to provide for their own children. And what I would say is that's not charity. It's about investing in the next generation and providing a better opportunity. And so after a year of bouncing back and forth between foster care and my mom getting it together enough to be able to get us back, she just realized that she just couldn't keep us together as a family. And so that's when I was separated from my brother and my mother, and I was put on a bus to go live with my grandmother, who was disabled but much more stable, didn't have a lot of resources, and was living in Section 8 housing. And that really turned my life around. I remember, it was 11 o'clock at night. I got off the Greyhound bus. I kind of shudder now to think about being sent to my grandmother at 10 years old on a bus hours away by myself, with just like the bus driver looking out for me. But that was, that's what needed to happen. And getting off the bus from my grandmother, and my grandmother like looking me over and making sure that I was okay. And she said to me, Nikki, you're fortunate enough to be born in a different America than the America I was born into, because she was born in Mississippi to sharecroppers. And she's like, to the greatest generation of women that will have ever lived, what are you going to do with it? And I looked at her because I was 10 years old, and that was kind of like a hard concept. And I looked at her and I said, Grandma, I want to be a lawyer and I want to have lots of shoes. And the reason that I said I wanted to be a lawyer is because I didn't really fully understand what a lawyer did, but I understood that they spoke up for people who needed help. And I wish that there were people to speak up for me. And so that was something that I wanted to do with my life. And the reason I said that I wanted shoes is because when I came to my grandmother, I only had 1.5 pair of shoes. And the reason I had 1.5 pair of shoes is I lost one of the shoes that actually fit me in one of the shelters. And the pair of shoes that they gave me never quite fit. And so that to me felt like wealth, being able to speak up and be empowered, not just for myself, but for other people, and to have like all the shoes in the world. But here's the thing, it was really hard going to my grandmother. As grateful as I was for her taking me in, I still wanted to be with my mother and my baby brother. The other thing was I was traumatized and I didn't have the language for that. and I'd gotten off the street, but it wasn't a normal part of my childhood, and I didn't know how to ask for the help that I needed. One of the things that might be relevant to people who are listening, especially if you're in school and you've gone through this, because I had been out of school for months, they wanted to hold me back and not let me progress to the next grade, which would have been fifth grade. And so this is where having an advocate, whether you're lucky enough to have a family member like I did, or if it's somebody within the school. My grandmother advocated for me. She didn't have a lot of education herself, but she marched herself right up to that school and said, my granddaughter is smart. You are not going to hold her back. Test her and see where she is before you make a decision. Because I think she understood that if I'd been held back and maybe labeled as, being behind, that would have impacted what I thought I could do for myself in the future. And I think she may have been right. And it turned out that when they tested me, I tested gifted in math and English, even though I'd been out of school for months. And I don't know that I was necessarily gifted, but what it did is it took the stigma of being like a homeless kid and behind, and it put a different label on me. Not just for me, but for my teachers, for the principal, for everybody in the school, that I was talented and I was worth investing in. And that helped me believe in myself and believe that my education was going to be the thing that I had, that nobody could take away from me, that I could work my way out of. But even though I had that label on me, I still had trouble riding the school bus. I still was kind of like inside myself and didn't trust my classmates, didn't touch my teachers. And it took a lot of love and support of people seeing the best in me to be able to trust them over time and to kind of come out of my shell. And once I came out of my shell, I don't think I've ever shut up since then. But I'm so incredibly thankful for the school, for my grandmother, for people who believed in me. And I want to just say, thank you both for the work that you do. And sometimes, you have to carry people when they can't carry themselves. Sometimes people can't walk yet. And sometimes they need you to carry them. Sometimes they need you to be a mirror and reflect the beauty and the brilliance and the creativity that you see inside of them that they may not see yet. And there's something to be said for the ability to have survived and overcome that. I used to think when I was younger that it meant that I was less, and why did I go through all of those things? But I realize now that I've gotten older that the fact is I didn't just survive, but I thrived. And not everybody does survive these circumstances, and that I should be proud of that, because not everybody could do what I did. Not everybody could overcome what I've overcome. And that's what I'm saying to your students who maybe are struggling through that. You're still here. You're still fighting. You're still showing up to school. You're still taking those tests, even though your family situation may be unstable. You're still showing up. You may not have everything that your other classmates have. I didn't really have decent clothes, and when you're young, like looking good matters. I didn't have all of that, but you know what? I still stood up and still showed up every single day, and that matters. That's so important. And my grandmother taught me so many lessons. She needed to use food stamps, and she was on Section 8 to take care of me. And I remember going to the store and being so embarrassed at the grocery store because it was old school with the old colored money, and she'd bring it out. And like, I could just feel the shame burning in me that everybody would know that we were poor. And I tried to like run away and like leave her. And one time she like grabbed my hand and she stopped me. And she said, I don't want you to run away from this. She's like, we need the help. But she's like, I want you to remember how this feels. And when you get to be older, make different choices in your life so you don't have to be in this place. And she's right. I held on to that. And once I turned 18, I've been fortunate enough to not have to use food stamps. And that doesn't make me better. That just makes me fortunate. But in the times when I have thought about giving up on my dreams, I've remembered what that felt like and remembered that I wanted something more for myself. And that was enough to kind of keep me going. So I went to my grandmother and I stayed with my grandmother from 5th grade to 8th grade. Got healthy again emotionally. I was underweight even when I went to like live with my grandmother, and really got healthy again. But then my grandmother, when I was in 8th grade, she got sick. And so the decision was made that after I graduated from 8th grade, that my mom was stable enough and that I could go and try to live with her and my new stepdad. And my mom had met my stepdad because he was a volunteer in one of the soup kitchens where we used to get meals. And we liked him because he used to give us like colored marshmallows, my little brother and I. He used to give us colored marshmallows as snacks because we want something, sugary and fun, even though we were in this tough situation. And so I went to live with my mother and my stepdad, and for about a year it was good. It was probably one of the most normal parts of my childhood that I can remember. At one point they even tried to bring my brother back, but he had a lot of trauma associated with that, and he had gone into the foster care system. And based on some of the things he ended up telling me later in life, he had survived some abuse, and so he acted out. And they tried to bring him back for a weekend visit, and he ended up chasing me around with a knife because some of the issues, he just couldn't come back into the family. And that always just made me very sad. But after a year, my mother and my stepdad, they lost their jobs and we ended up homeless again. And so back to my grandmother, I went. And this is where I think it's really relevant for the audience. When I went to live with my mother and stepdad, I had gone back to San Diego, and my grandmother had lived in Santa Maria, which is a different part of California. It's more central. And so when I went back to live with her, I was going back to school with kids that I had gone to like junior high and later in grade school with, but they had already done a year of high school and they had new cliques and new friendships. And when I came back, there wasn't a place for me, and I just felt all out of sorts. And so my grandmother was able to work for a few months and was able to get her Section 8 voucher moved back to San Diego so I could go back to the same school I had started high school in. And I think that's what people don't understand, how important the continuity of being able to go to school with people that you have friendships with, people that you trust, teachers who know you, teachers who will give you the benefit of the doubt, teachers who understand maybe how complicated your family situation is, where you feel safe, where you feel powerful, where you feel known, where you feel seen, where you feel heard as a student. And that's why this legislation and this work is so important, because when I went back to the high school I had started out, I bloomed. I was a varsity cheerleader. I joined student council, and, I became like that stereotypical teenager that you would see in the movies. I had my little Letterman jacket. I worked all summer at the movie theater to buy myself a Letterman jacket when I was a senior in high school. And it just gave me normality, and it set me up so that when it was time for me to look at going to college, I was on a set path. So it is absolutely essential, if you can keep kids in whatever school they're in, if they're thriving within that school, figure out a way to keep them there, because me going back to my school made such a huge difference for me. And that advocacy along the way, and my grandmother being willing to change her life and to take me in and to move so that I would have what I needed. And that's something that if you're a caretaker who's listening to this and you're maybe taking care of a child who's gone through this type of trauma, it is going to require some flexibility on your part. And the one thing that my grandmother didn't know to do, but I would really encourage, is therapy and family therapy, and not really buying into this idea, especially, and sometimes it can be cultural. So as an African American, I was definitely surrounded by strong Black women. And that was the message that was passed on to me. And that sometimes the message was, if you were strong, you didn't need anybody. But what I would say to you, strong is being healthy. Strong is being able to have good relationships. And the most important relationship you'll ever have is with yourself, and loving yourself and believing in yourself. Therapy, I've had therapy as an older adult, but I wish I'd had it when I went to live with my grandmother the first time, and certainly the second time. I wish I had taken the opportunity to get therapy a lot sooner, and that we as a family could have had therapy, because she had her own generational trauma, because people a lot of times repeat the patterns that they've seen in terms of parenting, in terms of discipline, even if it's not the most helpful, and or even if that discipline doesn't match up to the personality of the child that you may be raising. And so, that willingness, that selflessness on her part is part of why, I have this life. But it has been a journey that has had so many kind of twists and turns. And so I stayed with my grandmother. I finished high school. I ended up getting a scholarship to St. Joseph's University here in Philadelphia. And within the first semester, I had so much trouble as a first generation student. I came to Philadelphia from California. I didn't have a decent winter coat. People made fun of me because they were more affluent about wearing white after Labor Day. I didn't even know that was a thing. I wore what I had. I didn't know how to ask for the support that I needed. And I don't think there were as many programs for first generation students. And I don't think that people kind of understood what it meant to age out of the system. And so after my first semester at school, I was put on academic probation. And after my first year, I was actually kicked out of college and dismissed for failing to academically thrive. And I remember calling my grandmother, and I had aged out of the system. So I wasn't eligible for, any kind of help to go back and live with her. And she said to me, she's like, I've given you everything that I can. You have everything that you need to be able to survive. And I didn't know what I was going to do, but I was fortunate enough to actually answer an ad in the newspaper for a live-in nanny position, which I ended up getting for a Jewish family in the suburbs of Philadelphia, very much like how my grandmother had worked for wealthy families in the suburbs when I was growing up. I ended up working for a wealthy family in the suburbs. But what was different about this situation was I was really committed to going back to school. And I was fortunate enough to cross paths with a family that was committed to me going back to school. And so I would work for them from 7:00 in the morning to 6:00 at night. And St. Joe's actually took me back in their night school program. So what that meant was I lost my scholarship. I had to start all over again. But night school program was a lot cheaper. And I had a live-in job, so I didn't have to worry about paying rent. And I would go to school from 6:30 to 10:00 Monday through Thursday nights. And that is how I put myself through college. There was just a lot of people along the way who saw something in me and invested in me. I also needed to be willing to accept the hand that was being given to me. And that's an important lesson that I want to really reiterate with your audience, is you have to find people who are invested in you, who want to help you, but you also need to make sure that you're in a place that you're willing and able to accept that help. Because I think coming from poverty, you see people sometimes, especially if you want to go to college, who are much more financially probably blessed than you may be. And you feel like you got a raw end of the stick. And a lot of times you did. It's not your fault what you're going through. But my grandmother used to tell me that it wasn't my fault, but it was my responsibility to make a better life for myself. And two things can be true at the same time, which is the adults around you can have failed you in really significant ways. And it can be scary to try to have to figure out how you get through it. And as a kid, you shouldn't have to. You should not be in a position that you have to figure out your life at 10, 11, 12, 14, 15, 16. But the reality is, for so many of us, that is where we are. We are having to figure out our life. And we have figured out how to survive. But I want to say be creative and use that talent to not just survive, but to think about thriving so that you get out of that situation, but also that, you provide something different, maybe if you want to have a family in the future. And so, this family took me in and I had to be creative because I wasn't making that much money. And it was really important for me to have a place to live. So that job provided me a car to drive, and I would drive to class. It provided me a place to stay. It provided me food, and it provided me a small amount of money that, in addition to grants and loans, I could put myself through school. And that's what I did. And so I was on the 6-year plan, and people didn't know that a lot of times that can be how long it takes for a first generation kid to get through, because sometimes you have family obligations. You may have siblings that you are supporting, family members that you are supporting besides yourself, and those kind of responsibilities. But after 6 years, I did end up graduating with a bachelor's degree from the same college that I failed out of, which I'm very proud of. And I say it's not how you start, it's how you finish. I ended up going to law school at Temple University, and I ended up being one of the first students in the history of Temple Law School to graduate with a law degree, an M.B.A, and a master's in tax at the same time in 4 years. And I went to school full time for law school, so I did take out the loans to do that. But starting my second year in law school, I needed more financial support. So I actually started working as a night nurse. So I've been working since I was 11 years old as a babysitter. And I use that skill to level out to help me get through everything I kind of needed in life. So, there's a lot of people who are creative and have a hustle or they call them side gigs now. I was the queen of doing that. And so my second year of law school, I actually ended up working Friday and Saturday nights as a night nurse for a lawyer who was a single mom, and I would take care of her newborn baby. So I would stay up all night with the baby. Friday night, I would go home and sleep on Saturday, come back Saturday night, stay up with the baby all Saturday night, go home, sleep all day Sunday, and then do my homework on Sunday, and then go back to law school. And that's just what I needed to do. And so I am going to be completely transparent and honest with you. It was long. It was hard. I'm not going to make it sound like a fairy tale, because it wasn't. And there were just times that I cried myself to sleep because I was so tired and I didn't know if I could do it. But I always remember my grandmother saying to me that I was destined for greatness. I don't know that I necessarily believed it. I never wanted to let her down. And there was something about somebody saying that they saw something in me that made me believe maybe I can't be great, but maybe I can be good. And that was enough to kind of keep trying. It's okay to feel down. I think that's normal. I think a lot of times, people go through these kinds of situations and they feel depressed. That's normal. I have, and I still do, because even as an adult, I live with, the fact that I didn't grow up with, a mother and father in the traditional sense. And, I see my friends and colleagues be able to spend holidays and things with their families. And that just isn't, that isn't my life. So I've had to create something new for myself, but I've created something that I'm very proud of. And, that's the thing. You have the opportunity, whatever your parent situation, whoever's taking care of you, you don't have control over what they do, but you have control over what you do, and you can build something different. and better for your life. And it can be greater than anything that you've ever imagined, but you have to pick yourself up and you have to keep going. And, I learned this lesson so much from my brother, because I can't tell you my story without telling you my brother. When I went off to college, my brother was back in foster care. He actually, at that point, was in group homes, and he ended up dropping out of high school. And then when I failed out of college, we kind of lost contact with each other, and we lost contact for about 11 years. And he was able to find me, I'm not sure how, but probably Google somehow, but he was able to find me my last semester of law school. And on paper, it seemed like he had done okay for himself, actually better than okay. He was moving the sets around of the television show Frasier, and he had gotten a job through Catholic Charities, but that show was about to go off. And I went to visit him on my final spring break, and it turned out that my brother was addicted to meth and had contracted HIV. When we first reconnected, it was really great because I had missed my little brother, but it was very hard for him. I think he felt resentment that I got to go to my grandmother and he didn't. And the only reason my grandmother picked me over him is because I was a girl. And I think back then people felt girls were more at risk within the system. And that has turned out to not necessarily be true. But it was the luck of the draw. And I had a lot of survivor's guilt. Like, it wasn't easy for me, but I was raised with someone who loved me and said good things to me and fought for me. And that is very empowering. And he didn't have that. And so after Frasier went off the air, he really just kind of had a downward spiral. And, I tried to convince him to go back and to get a GED, but he couldn't pass the math portion of the test. And he just got so depressed. And in 2010, I got a phone call that he had, that he hung himself in court-ordered rehab. And he didn't pass away right away. He was on life support, and I had to fly out to California and take him off of life support. And, the one thing is, my brother he had such a hard time. He couldn't get past the fact that we never went back to live with my mom again. And, being in the system just did not work for him. He was so smart and so creative, and it just kind of crushed him. It just kind of crushed his spirit. And I don't want that to happen to anybody who's listening here. You may not see it now. You may not have people who are saying this to you, but you are capable of doing great things. You are capable of achieving your dream. You just may not be in the right environment. And so your goal is to surround yourself with better friends, better find a teacher, a neighbor, an auntie, a play cousin who can see something in you, and go to them and talk to them. And when you're struggling, talk to them and open up, talk about it. If somebody offers you counseling, take it. It doesn't make you weak. I want you to survive. I want you to thrive. And I'm saying the thing to you that I wish I'd had the language at the time to say to my brother. I know that he felt like I was judging him, and I was like, why can't you just make better decisions? And I know the answer now for him was he just didn't know how. And I wish I had have said to him that I would help him through it and that I would be waiting for him however long it took. And so I didn't get the chance to say it to him, but I'm getting a chance to say it to the people in the audience. If you wake up tomorrow, you have an opportunity to have a different life, to make different choices, to make different decisions. And I want you to take it. I absolutely want you to take it, because my family didn't just lose my brother. The world lost somebody who could have done extraordinary things if he just could have seen that in himself. And I think after the death of my brother, it took me a good year. I really struggled. I'll be completely transparent. I was mad at God. I didn't understand why, after I'd gone through all of this stuff in my life and I thought made good choices and got on the other side of it. Like, I graduated, I was a lawyer, I was a success story. Why was this happening to my family? And I think doing the advocacy work, sharing my story, raising money, raising awareness about these issues, I think through that process, the answer I've come to is, why not my family? Nobody's family deserves to go through this. No one deserves not to have a roof over their head or to know where their next meal is going to come from. And so that maybe why it happened to my family is because maybe I was going to use it to speak out. And because I am a successful lawyer now, I've been given the opportunity and the privilege to go to Congress and Capitol Hill and talk about these issues. Because so many times when you talk about poverty, people just frame it around the idea of people are lazy and why don't they make better decisions. And I think what me having found success can do is I can articulate for people that two things can exist at the same time. Yes, personal decision making is important, but especially for young people, you have to grow into being able to make good decisions. And sometimes people are born into circumstances where they don't feel like they have any good choices. And that we as adults and we as a society need to be invested in. We can't fix if, you weren't given the parents that maybe you deserve. We can't necessarily fix that, but what we can do is we can provide programs and access to things that you should have if you had been born with parents who could provide those things for you. So good schools, safe schools, medical treatment, access to student loans and grants so you can go to school, teachers who are well paid and engaged, your ability to live in a place that doesn't have asbestos or to go to a school that doesn't have asbestos, all of those things, for you to have meals at school. Yes, I've heard the arguments that your parents should provide those things for you. But if your parents can't, or they're not able to for whatever reason, are we going to let kids starve so that they're hungry and they can't do their homework and they can't have the ability to be able to? Because if you're hungry, you're not thinking about math. If you don't know where your next meal is coming from, how are you going to think about college? And so I can say, and I can look at my story and point at my story and say, these things were provided for me. These investments were made in me. And this is why I have been able to achieve some of the things that I've been able to achieve. Because as great as my grandmother was and how many good lessons she taught me, if she didn't have food stamps, she wouldn't have been able to feed me. So lessons don't feed you. I needed lessons and food. And food stamps, without somebody caring about me and investing in me and telling me about the things that I needed to get through life, that also wasn't helpful. And so, but sometimes that's not going to come from your parents. And that is just going to come from the people around you. And I would say, pay less attention. Don't focus about what you don't have. Focus on the access to the things that you do have. And it would be great if you had loving parents, but what's most important is that you have people who love you. And it may be a teacher, it may be a neighbor, maybe an auntie. For me, it was my grandma. That love, that commitment, that investment has blossomed. And every dream that I wanted during that time It didn't always happen in my time. I said it happens in God's time. It didn't happen in my time always. But I remember being in high school and I wanted to study abroad, but we didn't have any money. But you know what? I was able to study abroad in Italy for an entire summer when I was in law school. And that was in my 20s. And in my 30s, I won a fellowship. I was an Eisenhower Fellow, and I actually ended up winning a fellowship to look at ways to end generational poverty in India and New Zealand. And so I took a 2-month leave of absence from my job, and I used my life experience, and I went to India, and I talked to kids. There were little kids who were like 9, 10 years old. Like how I worked my way through college, they were working their way through grade school. And I was sharing my story all over the world. And I would have never thought that that would even be possible. And I like to say that one of my biggest dreams, and it might sound silly to people, but I don't think any dream is silly, honestly, is I remember being in the common room of a shelter and the Miss America pageant was on, and I saw like these gorgeous women. They were going to college, competing for college scholarships, wearing, these beautiful dresses. And I was like, I want to do that one day. And then about 5 years ago, I competed in my first pageant. I was second runner-up. I ended up competing again about 3 years ago. Gosh, almost 4 years ago now. And I was selected as Miss Pennsylvania. And then 2 years ago, I was crowned as Ms. Universe, MS Universe, for the girls over 29. So I always say it's a dream deferred, not a dream denied. And so some of those dreams took decades longer than I thought, but they all came to fruition. And so that's what I would say. What's your dream? I'm here to tell you that it's possible, and don't let anybody else talk you out of it. And the only difference between where you are and where I am is just time and opportunity. But the ladies that are interviewing me for this podcast, the work that they do is about providing you that opportunity. So if you get down, if you want to give up, if people around you are telling you that it's not possible, I want you to remember what my grandmother always told me, which is you're destined for greatness, and don't you forget it. So thank you so much, ladies, for allowing me to share my story.
Wow, Nikki. Well, thank you for sharing your story and for being so vulnerable and sharing those, personal details. I know it's not easy, no matter how many times you have shared your story. I'm sure it just never gets easier. But there are some questions that I think have popped up throughout your story. First and foremost, just taking it back to when you said you were placed in foster care. May I ask what was the reason that you had to be placed into foster care?
We were homeless. My mom just couldn't provide, a home for us. And I'm not, I was a little kid, so I'm not sure what the policy was behind that. But I know that had always been the thing that my mom had been concerned about. I'm assuming now that probably wouldn't happen, that they would probably find some kind of emergency housing for us. But you also have to understand, during that time, there wasn't necessarily this idea of housing first. And people thought, when my family was going through homelessness, people thought homeless men were Vietnam veterans. That's really when people thought of the homeless issue, they didn't think about women and children. They didn't think about women at all. They thought about men who come back from war, who had mental health illnesses or had, or had drug addiction. And they thought it was just those who wandered through the park. And honestly, people were not very kind or providing of grace to want to help them. So that's why you only had a place to live overnight. And there wasn't this idea. I don't think there was really an understanding that a lot of it's not like my mom didn't have some of those issues, like addiction issues and mental health issues, but a lot of it was access to affordable housing. It was not having kind of not generational wealth, but that ability that if something goes wrong, you can maybe go to a family member. She kind of ran out of that. And so I think people didn't understand that sometimes people end up being homeless because they just can't afford to have a place to live. And so, people saw my mom as, honestly, because we were homeless, as perpetuating some kind of abuse on us. And so, I think that it was come from a lack of ignorance, not in trying to do what they thought was best for us, but separating us. And I think people understand that now, that if you can keep families intact, you're probably going to have better outcomes for the kids, if at all possible. Not every situation lends itself to that. My mom passed away last year, but what I would say is that I think she would say that I was better off with my grandmother, and it's the most selfless thing that she did was to decide that she couldn't keep us together as a family. But yeah, I mean, someone basically dropped a dime on us and said, hey, this woman's got these kids, and the next thing we know, there's a social worker taking us away.
And to your point, at that time, that was a thing. That's what they did. And one of the things that I try to, whenever we go out and do trainings to our educators, we want to make sure that they understand that homelessness is not a reason that children should be taken away from families, as you stated. We are mandated reporters, but homelessness is not a reason to take these students and put them into a foster home or a system. And really right now we're at a point where our foster homes we don't have enough of them. And we have a lot of families who are in cars and in abandoned buildings where people have called Childline on them, but they're not taken away because they are not being neglected, even though people may feel that choice is not their choice, but the students are being loved. They are not, and they're being fed, and they're taking care of the resources, and the resources are being given because the school knows that they are in this situation, and the school is providing food and is providing hygiene kits and laundry and things like that. School is always one of the things that we always try to bring things back to, and reminding people why school is so important. And you had mentioned, and I want to just kind of highlight some of the things that you said, because I think some of the things, there's so much that you said was so important. But as you said, school and the continuity of school was so important, which is why the McKinney-Vento Act is so important. You went back to a school and you thrived, a school that people knew you, heard you, you felt heard, you felt like, I can be a traditional student, I can be the stereotypical kid. And too many times our students who are going through that cannot feel that. But if they can stay in their school where they can have that consistency, that's important. And I think that's, I wanted to reiterate that. And again, just highlighting some of the things you said. Strength can come in so many different forms. And I believe that one of the strongest things you can do is ask for help, however help looks like. I believe that counseling, everybody should be in counseling. It doesn't matter if you've gone through anything or not. Everybody should be in counseling. But as you said, when you're a student or when you're a child, you don't have the language. You don't know what you don't know. You don't know how to ask. You don't know how to put into words what you are feeling, because, oh my gosh, what you're feeling is so chaotic. And I think about the adults that we work with in our professional lives, who are in the education system, who are in the agency system, who are in the foster system, the adults who are supposed to know things. And sometimes those adults have a hard time asking for help, having a hard time talking about counseling. And yet here we are telling everybody, go to counseling, go to counseling. So
I would say you're your worst client.
Right. Yeah. So I think it's important to highlight that.
And I like what you said about strength, because I heard a quote the other day that I loved it so much. It said, not all strength is loud.
No.
Oh, I love that.
Right? I did too. And I'm like, because a lot of people don't see what someone is actually battling, those inner battles. And sometimes that strength is sometimes internal. It's not always, out there. People don't see it. It doesn't have to be seen in order to be identified as true strength. So I heard that and I was like, oh my gosh, that's gonna stick to me forever because it doesn't have to be loud in order for it to be considered strength.
Sometimes just waking up is strength.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes just waking up is strength and showing up is strength. So again, these are just things that you said that we just want to continue to highlight. And knowing that your parents maybe who are supposed to love you, but they are not the ones that love you. And that's okay because you have people in your life who do love you. And it can look like a teacher. It can look like a counselor. It can look like a coach. It can look like your auntie. It can look like anybody else. It doesn't have to look what people say it looks like. Unfortunately, we get so attached to all of those things. And I know in my life that was you're supposed to honor your father and your mother. And my mother beat the crap out of me. Why am I supposed to honor that? So, you gotta, sometimes we have to unlearn the things that we are told to know that it's okay.
Don't envy others for what they have.
Right. Yeah. And I think
a lot of times what you think they have isn't what they really have, or it doesn't read that way to them. Everything has but everything has a cost. And I think
Absolutely.
people don't understand that.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yes. Yes. And I think that some survivors have learned the why not me frame of mind. I learned that, I would say, probably in my 30s. I don't know how I became that healthy because I really think that's a healthy mindset, but it's a hard mindset. It used to be a why me kind of thing. And then I thought to myself, why not me? I'm not, while I'm special in many ways, why not me? Why can't I? I have shown that I can do hard things, and maybe someone else can't do those hard things. And okay, I will do this hard thing. And I think survivors tend to learn that. I'm not saying that that's an easy thing and that we all should learn that. I am not saying that, that's not a daily struggle. As you said about working all the time is hard. I don't think that, I think we have to be very honest about that. What you said, you worked hard. You had days where you cried. You had days where you were continually working, going to school and doing hard things, but you continued. Many things can be right. It can still suck. It can be hard, and it can still be something that puts you on a path of greatness. And I always believe that everything that happens in our life takes us to exactly where we are today. And Nikki, I can't express to you and tell you how many different ways that you are an amazing person, that your pageantry is a great story. And I believe that your winningness in the pageantry, while it's a beauty contest, the beauty from within shone so bright that there was no way you were going to lose when you went in there. And your shoes, every time I have seen your shoes, have been fabulous. And
yes,
as someone who is half Filipino, I appreciate shoes like you would not believe.
It's like his Carrie Bradshaw, Sex in the City.
Yes, yes. Oh, yes. Oh,
I have a shoe closet.
Carrie Bradshaw of shoes. Every time I see her, she is on point with the shoes. But every bad moment, and I'm sorry that you had those bad moments, and I'm sorry that you've had to have those traumas. But oh my gosh, the person you are today, because of those traumas and those moments, you are this person who is not only a professional, a lawyer, a motivational speaker. You are a kind and magnificent person. And that is what you are. And that is the greatness that your grandmother saw. And that I am so lucky to see, I only get to see you once a year, but man, is it an impactful time when we get together, right?
I know. I love seeing you. Like, that is one of my highlights of going to Harrisburg. And I always say that kindness is my superpower, because I love what you said about strength is not always loud. I'm definitely someone who speaks a lot, but I think about trying to speak to people with not kindness, because you can really wound people with words. And especially in the world that we live in now with like social media, there's just something about somehow people will go that extra step and say something that just is not kind. And I don't get where that comes from, because so many people have exhibited kindness to me. And if someone had spoken poorly to me in a moment when I was really struggling, that could have really done damage. But in the times when I was really kind of at my lowest moments, people spoke a kindness to me. And I just think that's how we pay it forward. And look, at the end of the day, I'm sharing my story, but you guys are doing the real work. So, thank you for all the kindness that, you've always shown to me, and your graciousness and letting me, share my story. But you're the superheroes. Like, let's not anybody get it twisted. You're the ones that are in the schools. You're the ones that are fighting sometimes people's prejudice. And sometimes you're fighting people to help them because they don't know how to accept that help. And that's amazing. And so many times we put on a pedestal people who we perceive as being super successful and super rich, but you're the kind of people who are not paid enough for what you do. There can't be too many of you. And if you weren't there, the world would be less of a place for your absence. And so, I want it to be your kids that you were encountering. I hope you took something from my story, but if you had to ask me, I would say be like these ladies. Be like these ladies.
Thank you, Nikki. Now, you are an inspiration, and I like how you mentioned, some people being prejudiced to the topic of homelessness or whether or not they were in foster care. Do you notice that when you share your story, do some individuals come up to you and say, "Wow, Nikki, I would never have guessed that. You don't seem like someone who was homeless, or you don't seem like someone," because right away they think, if you're homeless or if you're a foster kid, you have to be in this box only.
That you have to, I've had people go, "Wow, you don't smell," or "Wow, you speak so well." And I'm like, well, because I'm educated, I have a law degree. What would you expect? And, I've been fortunate enough that I like to say, I don't look like everything that I've been through, but a lot of those scars are still on the inside. And that's why I try to have transparency and vulnerability, because a lot of times people make it sound like once you've gotten to a certain place, that everything that ever happened to you, you're not poor anymore, so you shouldn't worry about it. But here's the thing, I still get excited by going to the grocery store, because that makes me feel rich. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can buy all the food that I want at like one time. And it doesn't have to be like Christmas or my birthday. And when I hand over my card, I don't have to be afraid that it's going to be rejected. That feels like winning to me. But there are still scars, and that is part of my journey. And, it informs how I move forward in life. And I think that that's important, because people who still struggle with it think that they're doing something wrong. It isn't wrong. Mm-hmm. My foundation of who I might have been if I'd had a more normal childhood was taken away from me. And so I still mourn the little girl that I could have been. And there are places in me that I'm still, that little scared 10-year-old girl. And instead of pushing her away, I have decided to nurture her inside of me.
Yes.
And to provide grace to her and to forgive the people who made mistakes, who cared about me, and to forgive myself for the mistakes that I made, because I made my own set of mistakes. And, here's the thing. I needed second, third, and fourth chances. It wasn't a straight line. And so many times we're only willing to provide grace to people if they act perfect. Well, people who act perfect don't need grace.
Mhm.
They don't need help because they're going to do everything that they need. You need grace, and you need people to extend the kindness and forgiveness and to see beyond that, because you can't go through that trauma. Either I say you lash out or you lash in.
Mhm.
And for me, I was so hard on myself and had such anxiety within myself. And it's something that I still struggle with sometimes. And those things can coexist, which is, I have a wonderful life. I'm married to a wonderful man. I am successful by, humble brag. I am successful and I earned that, but it came at a cost. And almost everybody in my life that I started out with in terms of my family, they're all gone. It's just me. It's just me and my uncle. Everyone else has passed on. And I'm not even that old. And so there's a cost to that. And that is some of the things that your students are going to struggle with. This is a struggle that they will have the rest of their life, but everybody has struggles. Like Sonia said, we should probably all be in therapy, no matter where you came from. But here's the thing. I think I get better every day.
Mhm.
And I feel like this is where the work is, and sharing this story, I think is important, because you can see the good things that were done. You can see some of the mistakes that were done. And I still turned out okay. Not perfect, but I'm proud that when I look in the mirror, I turned out to be the woman that I had hoped to be when I was that 10-year-old little girl getting off the bus. And that person is forged through fire and failures and successes. And at the end of the day, I've had some big mess ups, but my successes have outweighed those failures. And, I've learned the lessons.
No, I think it's very important to heal the inner child within us all. So when you give that little 10-year-old girl a hug, give her a hug from us too, and
Mhm.
let her
Aw.
that we are proud of her, and that's strength. Because like I said, strength is not always loud, but I want you to be loud when you tell her you're proud of her.
Absolutely.
Oh, I love that.
Absolutely. And I think we need to make sure that we all continue to give ourselves grace.
Absolutely.
We are always going to be a work in progress, and we need to give ourselves grace. So that also is in there. We'll be loud about giving ourselves grace, about healing our inner child and allowing the inner child to scream and cry, but also hugging and everybody. I think everybody on here, we should be proud of yourselves. So
Absolutely.
Nikki, thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you to our audience who are listening in. And please join us again for next month's podcast on I Will Be Your Voice, a McKinney-Vento moment.